Most engineering professionals want to be great project managers, and we're lucky that today I have one. James Houston has accomplished a lot at a young age. He is an assistant vice president at WSP, and he has managed some very large projects. And in today's video, he's going to share with us 5 lessons that he's learned that has helped him to be a great project manager. Let's jump right in. Now, I'd like to welcome our guest onto the podcast for today. James Houston is an associate vice president at WSP USA. James, welcome to the Engineering Project Management Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be here.
No, it's great to have you. You've done a lot in your career with regards to project management, and we're just happy to have you to come on and share a little bit about your experience. And let's start off, James, just in your own words. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what it is that you do on a daily basis at WSP.
Okay. Well, to start off, I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I attended Morgan State University. Got my bachelor's degree in civil engineering in 2011. After graduation, I actually moved to Illinois. And I started my career in Illinois across the country, or so to speak, the Midwest, being recruited right out of school for IDOT. So I worked for the Illinois Department of Transportation for the first 4 years of my career. And it was really in that experience where I got a sense of direction of the industry and where I was going to be, getting myself involved in, because it was very different from school. And so actually working in construction and design and bridge maintenance. And so I got that exposure to various aspects of civil engineering within my first job at the Department of Transportation. From there, I moved on to a small firm called Gabald Hamilton Associates, and I spent about 5 years there doing a lot of municipal engineering and athletic types of projects, school district types of projects, hospitals. And so that was a very different experience for me, but it was still within the realm of construction management. And then in 2019, I came to WSP as an RE. And, since then, I've actually grown to be, as you mentioned, an assistant vice president, where my main duties are kind of like twofold. So on the project level, I work within the project management oversight, so program management for one of the commuter rails. They're one of our big clients out here in Chicago. I'm a construction manager for that oversight program. And then I also do project management for a host of other City of Chicago projects, IDOT projects. And then on the business side, I am the client relations manager for the City of Chicago Department of Transportation. And as a part of that role, I'm a pursuit leader where I go after projects and, do capture planning for future work for the business.
Wow. I mean, first of all, congratulations. I mean, you graduated Morgan State in, I believe, 2011, and here it is in 2023, and you're a assistant vice president at a very reputable firm. So congratulations to you. Another thing I think that we didn't mention here is I think you have an MBA as well. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit while, James, with some of his certifications that he has. We could talk a little bit about the MBA and how they have helped him in his career. But one of the things I want to ask you about, just in regards to what you talked about in your career journey, is you were on the East Coast, you were in Baltimore, you went to school. When you graduate school and you go into your career, I mean, that's one of the biggest probably life transitions that anyone has to deal with. Like you said, right? You go from like studying in classes to actually, real life engineering projects, which is very complex. And a lot of people, you start living on your own for the first time in your life. And for you had like a double transition because you kind of relocated to another part of the country. So I would imagine that was very difficult, but I would also imagine that it was very helpful. Getting through that was probably helpful for you in terms of being able to deal with change like that early on in your career.
Yes, it was. And, I think for me, that was one of the biggest and most pivotal points in my life where it was a very impactful decision to just pick up and, move across the country to a place where I'd never been before, to experience, the start of my career, just, in that area. And it helps drastically because the ability to adapt to that new location, new environment, and obviously this new career that I had, it really helped me along the way in terms of how I approached my job on a day-to-day basis and dealing with change and things like that for projects. So it definitely strengthened me in that regard.
Yeah, I would imagine. All right, so we're going to get into 5 specific kind of lessons that you've learned as a project manager. And the first one we're going to talk a little bit about is communication. What have you learned as a project manager about communication, James?
So communication is essentially, Anthony, it's like 90% of what we do. I use that as like a baseline number because I mean, it really, everything that we do on a day-to-day basis, we communicate. Whether it's with your stakeholders, whether it's with your team, the contractor, vendors, all aspects of the project throughout the life cycle of the project, you are communicating. And being able to do that effectively is the key to having a successful project and to deliver the outcomes that the client or owner has set forth. And so one of the key outputs of that that I've learned that has helped over the years is a communications plan. I think that is very key in setting the standard in terms of how you are going to communicate throughout the project, whether that be in standing meetings that you have regular cadence for, if you have internal or external stakeholders, how you plan to engage them and how you plan to communicate with them. Some may have different needs. Some may want to be involved with the daily progress or weekly progress meetings. Others might not. And so having that plan early to meet with all the stakeholders, meet with your team, and to be able to do that and come up with a plan on how you're going to communicate over the life cycle of the project is key. And, documentation goes along with that. Meeting agendas, meeting minutes, that way you can always go back and reference those documents and those conversations.
Yeah, no, I love that you said that because people always tell project managers and engineers, technical professionals that you need to be great communicators, but they don't always tell you how necessarily, or some tips that you could take. So I appreciate you giving some tips. And I think that stakeholders point is really important. We do a lot of PM training at EMI, and one of the tools that we like to use is like a matrix, like an interest versus influence for your stakeholders. Like, how interested are they in the project and how influential are they, right? Like if the mayor's interested in the project, obviously he or she is very influential. That's a stakeholder that you're really going to need to spend a lot of time, effort, and energy on. If it's someone who, is just a taxpayer, not necessarily even a neighbor to the property, they may not be that interested and they may not be that influential. They may be a stakeholder to some degree. So that's a good thing to think about planning. And the other thing too, that James said that I think is really important is not just communicating, but having a plan on how you're going to communicate with your projects. And a lot of the organizations that we work with, they do require like project management plans or PMPs on their projects. And that communication workflow is an important part of that plan, like setting that up from the beginning of the project. Who's going to be the client, of course, who's going to correspond with the client, and so on and so forth. So I think having a plan like that is important. And quite frankly, when I ask project managers usually like, what's the one thing that's the biggest change for you as a PM? Because James mentioned 90% of what we do is communication. That's really what I hear. Like you go from kind of communicating internally with your team members to internal and external communication, like client facing, stakeholder, et cetera. So definitely communication is a critical one. Now, when we talk about communication, one of the, obviously you're communicating with your team. So let's talk about your team a little bit, James.
Okay.
How can kind of getting to know your team help you to be successful as a project manager?
So, Anthony, that's a great point. And what I really believe is that people are our greatest asset. It doesn't matter the business, doesn't matter which facet of civil engineering, people are the most valuable asset. And so to that end, as a project manager, the goal should be, how do I create a high performing team within my environment? within my company, within my business line, within my organization or group? How do I create that high performing team? And so that is something that I learned when I became a project manager. I heard that term, high performing team. And what it really means is it's a group of highly skilled people that work together in a cross-functional setting in order to achieve an objective. And the objective in project management, as far as the construction management industry that I'm in, is, basically delivering those infrastructure projects for our client. And so since people are the most valuable asset and we come from different walks of life, different backgrounds, is how do you really get everyone on the same page to be able to work together effectively and efficiently to deliver those objectives and the goals for the client. I think one thing that is very important, imperative in that process is having a shared vision. You come together right after NTP. Once you get NTP as a consultant or a construction manager, you have a kickoff meeting with your entire team. And you go through introductions and get to know a little about each other. And then you can put together what's known as a team charter. And that team charter talks about that shared vision, the shared objectives and the goals of what you're trying to accomplish, everyone's role and responsibility on the project, the level of authority when it comes to communication, and to stakeholders, on a much broader scope, and then also at this project level. And so I think all teams also go through, whether especially if you're new, you go through a phase where you're trying to get adjusted to one another. And that kind of speaks to Tuxman's 5 stages of development. You have forming, storming, norming, performing, and then adjourning. And so, so my team, for example, we've been together for a number of years. And so we're at the point where we're kind of, flowing very cohesively. But it wasn't always the case. When I first started, I know, we went through that stage of storming and trying to, get on the same page. And, there were language barriers might be there for, cultural differences and ethnicity differences. And so you're trying to overcome all of those things. But if you can get to a point once you're performing at a, optimal level as a team, that presents the best environment to deliver for your client. And so, I've learned that trying to foster that relationship with your team members is very key, and make it fun. It doesn't have to necessarily, be at work. Have social events, go out after work, maybe have a pizza party in your project office on a Friday for lunch, and go while you're going over work. You make it fun because you want to learn the people that you're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we spend more time at work, than with our families sometime. So that's very, very key.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think when you hear about project management, a lot of the time you hear about, profitable projects, scope, schedule, budgeting, and you don't necessarily hear about the project team, which is really the essence of, being able to achieve a successful project. Without the team, it just doesn't get done, to your point. And so I think that's really important. I think what we'll see as we go through James' 5 lessons here, we've gone through 2 already, and you could see that how much communication was so important, and communication obviously plays a huge role in the team, right? Number 2. So I feel like communication's going to keep coming up through all these different lessons. But all right, so let's go on to the 3rd one. We talked briefly, we mentioned stakeholders a little bit before, but why is it so important to understand your stakeholders, James? I mean, actually, let me frame this out for those of you that are new project managers. If you're not familiar with stakeholders, really stakeholders are any parties that can be impacted by the project in any way, shape, or form. So talk about that for a little bit, James.
Okay, sure. So understanding your stakeholders is very important for any project. And I look at it high level in 2 ways, from an organizational standpoint, and then also from a people standpoint, always going back to the people being the most valuable asset. But from an organizational standpoint, you need to understand your stakeholders because you want to understand what's important to them. if you go work for a client in the vertical industry for vertical buildings, you want to understand like what are their goals and the objectives of creating this new high rise, or in the transportation highway industry, what's the objective of this new intersection or interstate. You need to understand what it's going to be serving, the purpose for why they're doing that. That's obviously first and foremost. Because if you understand what they're trying to achieve, you can create a plan for how, or essentially a roadmap for how you're going to help them get there. You need to understand their why, why they're doing it. You understand the challenges that go along with it, and how you're going to try to, as a team and an organization, fill that void and fit that need to be able to meet that. And that's from and then obviously the last component is managing their expectations, right? They put out projects for consultants to be the owners rep and kind of guide them through and take them across the finish line. And so we need to manage their expectations along the way. So from an organizational standpoint, that's where that's why you need to understand your stakeholders. And then also from a people standpoint, this is a little bit more personal, but I've learned over the years that it's still very key because, again, people are the most valuable asset. They may work for an organization as the client, but they're still people, just like you and me. And so learn a little bit about them. Where did they go to school? How long have they been working for at that agency or that owner, whatever, the company? What are their hobbies? Getting that face time with the client, and not necessarily just for business, but at organizational events and socials and happy hours and things like that. Like, what can you really learn about them that will help you manage their projects better? Certain clients, and you meet them, they have certain potential hot buttons, things that they don't like, schedule conformance or change orders of it. They may have certain preferences over, one area over the other. It's important to understand that. And so the more you learn about your client and know them on a personal level, not just the professional level, I think it helps, to that, maybe being able to manage your stakeholders overall.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, listen, again, communication comes into play, but the stakeholders can help you move your project forward, but they could also slow your project down depending on their stance, their feelings, their philosophies, which is why I think to James's point, getting to know them is important. I know for me, I worked as a civil engineer in land development, and I'd have to go to planning board meetings and try to get my projects approved in front of a board of, 5 to 7 individuals that some were technical, some were non-technical, and they, were trying to keep the best interests of that municipality in mind. And if I just went in there and said, I want them to approve my project because I want to get my project approved, it's not necessarily the best approach. You have to get to know these people, understand what they're thinking about, understand their concerns on your project and how you can alleviate those concerns. And so it's really just one of those things, engineering, project management, they come down to people a lot more than you would think, especially if you're an outsider looking in. But once you get into these projects, you really start to understand how much the industry is very people driven, and success is very predicated on all parties involved in these projects.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about change. Why is it important to adapt to change in the workplace?
Well, Anthony, as well as I do, as a professional engineer yourself, I've never been on a project where there hasn't been a change.
Right.
We always say that, the cliche, in a perfect world, right? In quotation marks. And but the reality is it's not a perfect world. And so you have to be able you have to be ready for change on any project at any given time. And change can come in a variety of ways. It can come on a project level from, specifics, plans or specifications not being, designed right, or say omissions and things like that. But change can actually come from external factors as well. Political environment. This is an election year. One of the things that we just got over with the coronavirus, supply chain issues, All of these things factor in and bring about change to a project, as well as a host of other things. And so, as a project manager, you have to be willing to adapt to change and being able to manage the change. So, I think the best thing to do is if we understand as project managers that there will always be change, how can we get ahead of it? How can we get ahead of it? And I think, again, it goes back to communication. When you're on your weekly progress meetings or biweekly design meetings or milestone review meetings, talk about, hey, is there anything that's going to impact our schedule? Are there any risks that going to, come to fruition that would impact the budget? Or the quality of our work or anything like that. So if you can have an open dialogue about that with the designer on record, the engineers, the contractors and vendors, then you can really understand the issue to get ahead of it. And that gives you a better handle on how you manage it going forward.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think that having a change management plan or strategy as part of your project management plan is always important, because you're going to need to manage change. And even doing some risk management or risk identification early on in your projects, especially for larger complex projects, can help you identify risks, which could turn into changes and other kinds of issues. And I think what you said about, in a perfect world is so true. I mean, I live around in the New York City area, and it's kind of like, it'll take us 30 minutes to get to the city if there's no traffic, but it's like, there's never no traffic in New York City, just like there's never no changes on projects. And, when we do our project management training courses, a lot of times I like to share in the training the quote from Mike Tyson: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And the same thing goes in projects. Like, everyone has a project management plan going in. Everyone knows how they want to manage their project going in. But what happens if you all of a sudden, for lack of a better term, get punched in the face, or, someone comes up with something that you're not expecting? How are you going to deal with that? And I really like James's idea of trying to be proactive about it and assume that something's going to happen and have a plan on how you're going to address it. And one of the things I'll say on that too is know who else can help you, especially from the client side. And that's something that is good at the beginning of a project to talk about with your client counterparts and say, hey, listen, there's a good chance we're going to run into some issues on this project for whatever reason. When we do, let's make sure we communicate. Let's get a plan in place on how we're going to tackle those changes. You can't be too prepared for changes on your projects, because they're going to happen. And they're also going to help you to deal with changes in your career, which quite frankly are going to happen as well. So I think just being able to adapt and adjust to change is a good thing in life overall. All right. So one more here on the 5 lessons here, James. Why do you believe that to be a good project manager, you need to know what you don't know?
Anthony, this is probably one of my favorite questions, because, it's kind of, it goes against, or, contrary to the reason why a lot of our clients, hire us. They expect us to deliver. They expect us to take charge and, manage the entire scope, budget, schedule of the project. But nobody knows everything. And so even though they expect us to deliver for them, as a project manager, it's very crucial to understand what you don't know and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And it's the reason why we have a team, right? So a team with different subject matter experts. You'll have a project manager, you'll have a material coordinator, you have a documentation, engineer, just some few examples, but there's a reason why you have a team. So when you don't know something, or if there's something comes up and it's, you may need a technical subject matter expert for, you have that team to reach out to. You have that organizational support to reach out to, and don't be afraid to ask, ask questions, ask for help if you need it. I can't tell you how many times as a project manager myself, where if I needed help and I knew someone else had the answer in another business line, I would pick up the phone and call, set up a meeting and discuss, like, hey, how have you addressed this in the past? I know you've dealt with this and I'm having a similar issue on my project. Can you help out with this? And, and they're more than happy to help out. And so I think being open and honest is very key. And even to the owner, if something comes up and it's very critical that, time sensitive, communicate to your owner. I'm like, I don't have the expertise on this particularly, but we have somebody in our organization who does. And so let's set up a meeting. So be open, be honest, be transparent. Don't just assume that that you know everything and that you can handle it. Because if that falls, or if that ball gets dropped, then, it's really bad, as far as, on you, on how you handle that and manage that, or mismanaged it rather. And so, know what you don't know, and don't be afraid to ask for help, and, ask for help from other colleagues.
Yeah, it's a really important point, especially for newer PMs, because I find sometimes as a new project manager, you're excited of, obviously you want to do a great job on your projects. You want to impress your organization, your client. So when someone asks you a question, like your thought process is, I have to give them an answer, right? Or else I'm not going to look competent in my job. And the problem with that is when you're dealing with jobs where, quite frankly, the public safety is potentially your responsibility. You can't just be giving answers on something that could have a very negative impact and could hurt people, quite frankly, if you're on a construction project or something like that. So, and I also think that, you build trust with your clients by being honest with them, right? And by giving them the right answer, even if it means you have to wait an hour or two to get the right information. So as hard as it is to do in the moment, it really is important to be able to be honest in all avenues and at all times with your clients and your team members. And so I think that that's really important. So, all right. So we got 5 key lessons there from James, from his project management experience. One was communication is critical. So it's something you need to practice and get really good at. Secondly was getting to know your team, right? Your project team is the most important aspect to being successful as a project manager. So beyond just getting to know the PM skills, concepts, and tactics, you got to get to know your team members, have fun, get to know them. Really important. Number 3 is to really understand your stakeholders, being those that have an impact or influence on your project. What's their philosophy? What's their perspective? And how can you, alleviate any concerns they might have or help them to, help you with the project? Number 4 was to be able to adapt to change. Change will happen on projects, not might happen, will happen. And you have to be prepared to roll with it. And then last but not least is to know what you don't know and then find someone who can help you with that information. And you can really see that communication does really run through all of those lessons, which is why it's such an important skill set to build. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to wrap up with our PM pitfall. We'll be back in just a minute. All right, we are back with James Houston. James is an assistant vice president at WSP, and he's given us some great lessons around project management. But now what I want to ask you, James, is what's the biggest PM pitfall that you've identified or that you've seen in your career, and how would you recommend that a project manager either overcome it or avoid it in their day-to-day practice?
Yes, Anthony. So I think a big pitfall for project managers, especially new project managers, are trying to reconcile the 2 aspects of the business, right? The project side and then the financial side. I think that is a very big pitfall, because we're, sometimes as project managers, we get so entrenched into the project itself, that we, for better, lack for a better term, we forget about the financial side, for monthly invoicings, estimates to complete. Are you tracking the labor breakage on your margins? And if there's anything eroding that, and as a result, it puts your business in a bad financial position, which brings a host of things. You have a project accountant, reaching out to you saying, why wasn't this done? You have auditors that then come to say, oh, we're falling behind on our, established goals and metrics for KPIs, kind of what's going on. And so I think that that is a common pitfall. And you know, especially for new project managers, get that training. Request that training from your manager, if you haven't had it, or if you haven't dealt with those metrics before, in that way as a junior level engineer. I think that you can avoid many pitfalls, which is ultimately the biggest one. It's the reason why we do the work that we do, to drive the financial success of our organization.
It's a great point, and I tell you, there's the technical side of project management, worrying about the work breakdown structure, the schedule, all these types of things. But then there's the financial side of the projects. And I do feel like you have to have a good balance between the two as a project manager. You really can't go too far into one without thinking about the other. And I think just globally, the idea of recognizing that your organization is a business, right? We say that in our project management training courses. We say, understand that your organization is a business and they do really good engineering. Not saying we're an engineering company, period, right? We're a business, got to make money, got to be profitable. We do great engineering, and that's how we make that money. So I think thinking about it in that way is helpful, because then it kind of keeps that in the forefront of your mind that, you know, we got to make money here. Right. And so then you can keep regular checks on how the budget is doing. You mentioned like your estimate to complete, which is another whole avenue that you just have to learn as a project manager, is the finance side of the business. And so, but what I will say, James, is that if you can learn that finance side of projects, I think you have a really good advantage, because I do find that it's kind of hard for a lot of project managers to get really good at, you know, both, like managing the team and like the project management side of things, and then managing the finances effectively. Right.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that could be a differentiator for someone as a project manager.
One of my managers on I guess a national level, he's actually our national director of client services. He told me when I became a project manager that the most valuable individual is the seller doer. And so it's you're selling and take care of the business side of the organization, and then also the doer is when you're at that project level or program level delivering for your client. That's the most valuable individual in the organizations. And you know, it really speaks to that duality that they can achieve and perform.
Yeah, for sure. No, the seller doer in today's world is going places because they can sell the business and they can execute on projects. And that's really what every company wants. And quite frankly, one last thing I'll say is, if you're a great project manager and you manage your projects great and build great client relationships, they will come back to you for more work. So in a sense, you're also doing business development by being a great project manager, and you should keep that in mind. Well, James Houston, thank you so much for spending some time with us on the Engineering Project Management Podcast. You gave us some really valuable lessons, and I'm sure our listeners are going to be able to use this as they develop as project managers. So thank you, James.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a great discussion.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with James. I mean, he's a young but successful project manager, and he really gave us a lot of great advice that I hope you can leverage on your path to a project manager or to become a better project manager. Please consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.